It's an honor to be with you all today and with such a great panel of experts. We're going to be able to speak to some realities that our society is very slow to look at, honestly. My name is Phelan. I'm with Human Life International. I'm the Director of Mission Communication. And I've been with HLI about 6 years, but we have partners in over 80 countries around the world who are trying to start pro-life and pro-family movements in Africa and Asia, especially southern hemisphere countries where the attack is really, it's younger, but it's very prevalent right now. So we always say it's easier to stop Roe than to reverse it once it's in place. And there's a lot of amazing people out there in the world who share that with us. So again, that's all I really need to say today. You don't want to hear from the moderator too much. If we could start with Eric. You want to go first? Eric Teetsel. And it's going to discuss the cost of family breakdown to taxpayers and compare those data to economic growth resulting from strong marriage cultures. Eric is the Executive Director of the Manhattan Declaration, a call of Christian conscience on life, marriage, and religious liberty. Before taking over there, he built the Values of Capitalism Project at the American Enterprise Institute, aimed at educating Christian college students about the links between the values of faith and the free enterprise system. Proud son of a career Army officer, Eric graduated from Wheaton College and earned a master's at Azusa Pacific University. In 2011, he married the love of his life, Abby. And they live with their daughter in Kansas City, Kansas. Go Royals.
If there was ever a testament to how important these issues are to me, it's that I'm here instead of in Kansas City today for the game. Thank you all for coming. This is really a wonderful turnout. I know there are a bunch of really cool panels going on right now. And I appreciate you coming for this one. There's going to be a ton of data on all different facets of this conversation from some esteemed experts. And I appreciate you giving me a chance to be one of them. Bear with me as I try to unplug this real quick. I'm supposed to be the tech-savvy millennial on the panel. There we go. So, my presentation today is on the economic costs of the breakdown of the family. And if this doesn't work, you just get to look at my beautiful wife instead, which is even better. Good enough. Okay. I'm going to start with a quote from one of my favorite authors, G.K. Chesterton. I actually wrote a whole book with my friend Andrew Walker based on this quote. Chesterton said, "The greatest political storm flutters only a fringe of humanity, but an ordinary man and an ordinary woman and their ordinary children literally alter the destiny of nations." What did Chesterton mean by that? Well, I think what he meant is that the family is the foundation of human civilization. And we should expect that when that foundation starts to crumble, there are going to be consequences. My purpose here today is to talk about financial cost, the breakdown of the family, and the financial gains where we see a strong, thriving culture of marriage and family that appreciates the roles of mothers and fathers. It's a pretty simple argument. American taxpayers spend billions and billions of dollars every year on poverty programs. The breakdown of the family is a major contributor to poverty. It's not the only contributor, but it is intrinsically linked to the experience of poverty in America. And conversely, a strong marriage culture produces economic benefits for individuals and society at large. There's a wealth of data on this topic that's out there. I'm just going to skim over it and give you some highlights, including some of the most recent work, and then we can dig a little bit deeper during our conversation, and you are likely to hear a lot more from my co-panelists here today. Larry Mead from New York University says, for the most part, serious poverty occurs in America when employment and family break down. Female-headed families where the parents fail to marry or to stay married are at high risk of poverty. 40.9% of such families with children were poor in 2012, compared to only 8.9% for two-parent families. Government supplies these families with various benefits, but nothing can fully compensate for the lack of parents who are committed to each other and working. Now, that might sound like a pretty controversial statement, but it's one that's been echoed by the leader of our government today, Barack Obama, who in 2008 said, we know the statistics. Children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of schools, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. They're more likely to have behavioral problems, or run away from home, or become teenage parents themselves. And the foundations of our community are weaker because of it. When the War on Poverty was launched back in the 1960s, well before my time, 7% of children were born outside of marriage. Today, that number has reached 40% and is growing across all socio-demographic groups. Marriage, conversely, drastically reduces the rate of child poverty. This is from Robert Rector's work at the Heritage Foundation. You can see here that the probability of child poverty in single-parent, female-headed families is about 37.1%. You compare that to married two-parent families at just under 7%. So, what do we do about this and what is the cost? According to calculations by Rector at the Heritage Foundation, in the last 50 years, Americans have spent about $22 trillion on anti-poverty programs. This doesn't include Social Security or Medicare. Between federal and state, Americans currently spend about $1 trillion a year combined on poverty programs. Where does all that money go? Here's just a snapshot of some of the major programs that we're talking about. $296 billion for Medicaid, the Earned Income Tax Credit, Child Tax Credit, SNAP, which is food stamps. You've got WIC, Head Start, TANF, which is cash aid to the poor, employment training, low-income energy assistance, and more and more. Government spending, of course, does not account for the entire cost of broken families. There are all kinds of ways of looking at these costs. We could just look at divorce. $30,000, $15,000 to $30,000 is an average in America for a contested divorce. For couples that divorce, you typically see decline in living standards both for men and women. Recent research has shown that, contrary to conventional wisdom prior, there's a negative impact on men for divorce, but the impact is especially felt by women and their children. Obviously, when you divide a household, living expenses double. You have 2 rents, you have 2 car payments, you have 2 electrical bills, 2 cable bills, 2 internet bills, but typically income remains relatively stable. That's a huge hit for everyone involved. Divorce requires the liquidation of things like investment assets, which are meant to be long-term. Obviously, there are tax consequences, long-term financial losses associated anytime you're taking out an investment before it's supposed to in order to liquidate your assets, to have them divided. Divorce is associated with depression. I read one study that talked about $36 to $52 billion in lost productivity annually due to depression. Divorce is a factor in depression in people's lives, certainly. So again, just trying to measure the full impact of the breakdown of family can be tricky. There are literally a million things that you could look at, trying to get a sense of the bigger picture. Obviously, a big question here is how do you measure the long-term economic trauma on the children of divorce when it comes to reduced gains. You can look at all the research that's been done on outcomes for children from broken families in terms of their own broken relationships, education, the need for psychological and clinical counseling, and so on and so forth. Now, the good news is there's a strong link between wealth and strong families. Ron Haskins has put forth an idea that he calls the success sequence. Essentially, his argument is do 4 things, and the chances that you end up in poverty are almost nil. Graduate from high school, get a job, and then get married before you have children. You could throw don't do drugs in here. No, probably don't too. But if you basically do these things, All the research that we have on socioeconomics shows us that the chances that you end up being poor and that your kids are poor is extremely low. Census data show if every American followed this pattern at the same rate they did in 1970 here in the US, 50 years ago, the poverty rate in America would be 70% less than it currently is. Some interesting new work being done by Brad Wilcox, who you've probably already heard here at the conference, and will no doubt hear again, of the American Enterprise Institute at the University of Virginia. He and some colleagues recently released a report about wealth and strong family culture, and discovered all kinds of fascinating things. Higher levels of marriage and married parent families are strongly associated with more economic growth, more economic mobility, less child poverty, and higher median family income at the state level. For example, if you compare states in the top quintile, that's the top 20% of married parent families, to the bottom, you find a $1,451 higher per capita GDP, a 10.5% greater upward income mobility for children of those parents, 13.2% decline in the child poverty rate, and a $3,654 higher median family income. They estimate in a similar report that the growth in median income of families with children would be 44% higher if the U.S. enjoyed 1980 levels of married parenthood today. There are all these premiums associated with growing up in an intact family. There's an intact family premium that's $6,500 for men and $4,700 for women over the incomes of their peers from single-parent families. Married men have an income premium over their single peers equivalent to almost $16,000 a year. That is to say, I, as a young married 31-year-old, can be expected to make $16,000 a year more than my unmarried 31-year-old counterpart. Some really interesting theories as to why that is. As a married man with kids, you talk about the assumption of responsibility, the need to care for others versus the need to go home and play World of Warcraft or something. It's often said that marriage stabilizes men and ushers them into another level of adulthood. I think there's probably some truth to that. My wife might disagree, but data bear it out. And of course, these effects, they reinforce one another. So if you have a married man and a married woman who both came from intact families, and they marry, there's a family premium where all of these effects combined result in over $42,000 a year over unmarried peers from non-intact families. To sum all of that up, Arthur Brooks of the American Enterprise Institute says, newsflash, marriage matters. All the latest evidence confirms the ancient wisdom. The institution of marriage is a key to productive adulthood, the cornerstone of a stable family, and the basic unit of a healthy community. Its effects go well beyond the married couple. It shapes our whole society, from workforce participation to economic inequality to the effectiveness of education. Children raised by married parents have better odds of succeeding in school, excelling at work, and building a stable relationship of their own. As I said, I just breezed through a ton of information. I'm sure that these slides are going to be available, and I'd be happy to share the sources of all of this information with any of you, and looking forward to furthering this discussion. With that, I will pass it on, and I'll try to get the computer set up again here.
Give it a shot. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Eric. Yeah, it's difficult to do a lot of what's going to be done here in 13 minutes apiece, especially with the gentleman with the background we have here today. But these are big issues, and they certainly will complement each other in the presentation. So I also forgot to thank you, Janice, and your whole team for fantastic. Everything you've put in place so far has been working great. My own contributions here notwithstanding, everybody's been very professional, and it's been a pleasure to work with everybody. So I will ask John Mueller to come up to the podium next. He's going to discuss the social and economic costs of legal abortion, specifically legal abortion's role in increasing rates of divorce, violent crime, and its socioeconomic consequences. He's a Lehrman Institute Fellow in Economics at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and author of Redeeming Economics, Rediscovering the Missing Element from ISI Books. He retired in January 2015 after 26 years as chief economist and president of the economic and financial market forecasting firm, LBMC LLC, also in DC. Mr. Mueller has advised, or Dr. Mueller has advised American, I'm trying to give you a promotion there. I know. Has advised American foreign economic policymakers on monetary, income tax, welfare, and social security policies since 1979. He was staff economist to then Congressman Jack Kemp from 1979 through 1988, before and during both Reagan administrations, and is senior fellow of the Lehrman Institute, a member of Princeton University's James Madison Society, a Jack Kemp Foundation Fellow, and senior fellow of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. So, John Mueller, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Just trying to. There we go. All right. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to see all of you this afternoon. At the World Congresses of Families in Warsaw, Amsterdam, and Madrid, and in the demographic summits in Moscow and Ulyanovsk, I presented and updated a country-by-country model of fertility, which has since been published in my book, Redeeming Economics. Today, I'd like to extend that analysis and reverse the causality implied by the title of our panel, The Social and Economic Costs of Family Breakdown. Instead, I will explain why legal abortion is the main cause of family breakdown, including specifically the rise in rates of divorce, illegitimacy, and crime, and entry of most developed countries, including now the United States, into so-called demographic winter. "15 years ago, I published a paper on the socioeconomic cost of Roe v. Wade. In it, I estimated the impact of legal abortion in reducing the U.S. population, and concluded, taken in its entirety, legal abortion is perhaps the single largest American economic event of the past century, more significant than the Great Depression or the Second World War. In sidebars, I considered the important collateral results. For example, showing that legal abortion is single-handedly responsible for the prospective deficits in the pay-as-you-go Social Security retirement system, and suggesting that legal abortion was also directly responsible for the 1970s and 1980s rise in crime rates. I was just starting a book which systematized these insights. The cover features Gustave Doré's engraving Arrival of the Good Samaritan at the Inn, because transcending nationality and religion, the parable of the Good Samaritan illustrates all the possible economic transactions we can have with our fellow man. The robbers beating a man and leaving him for dead illustrate crime. The priest and Levite who passed him by illustrate indifference. The robbers, the innkeeper's bargain with the Samaritan illustrates justice in exchange. And finally, the Samaritan's devotion of time and money to restore the beaten man to life illustrates a gift. So crime, indifference, just exchange, and gift. This is the range of possible transactions, as described by St. Augustine and incorporated by St. Thomas Aquinas in the original scholastic economic theory.
Mike, hold on a second.
In contrast, the premise of modern economic theory was expressed by Adam Smith's famous assumption in The Wealth of Nations that, in his words, every individual intends only his own gain. What I call neo-scholastic economics differs from Smith's classical and today's neoclassical economics, chiefly in retaining Augustine and Aristotle's theory of distribution, which comprises gifts and their opposite, crimes, and what Aristotle called distributive justice, as well as exchanges. This also makes neo-scholastic theory much more accurate. For example, updating scholastic theory refutes the famous claim by economist Stephen D. Levitt, featured in his mega bestseller, Freakonomics, that the U.S. Supreme Court's legalization of abortion in 1973 caused the crime rate to fall 15 to 20 years later by eliminating potential criminals. In fact, there is a 90% current inverse relation between economic fatherhood and homicide. Legalized abortion raised crime rates immediately and with a lag by turning new fathers back into men without dependent children. The neo-scholastic fertility model is also more accurate. Just 4 factors explain most variation in the birth rates among the 70 countries for which sufficient data are available, comprising about 1/3 of all countries, but more than 3/4 of world population. The birth rate is strongly and about equally inversely proportional to per capita social benefits and per capita national saving, both adjusted for differences in purchasing power. This is because both national saving and social benefits represent the provision by current adults for their own well-being. When these factors are taken into account, a legacy of totalitarian government is also highly significant, reducing the birth rate by about 0.6 children per couple. Finally, the birth rate is strongly and positively related to the rate of weekly worship. This is because all gifts of scarce resources, whether rearing a child or worship, require the same lowering of self and raising of others in our scale of preferences for persons. On average, throughout the world in 2005 and 2010, adjusted for differences in mortality, a couple which never worshipped had an average of 1.2 children. But the average couple which worshipped at least once a week had 2.4 more, or 3.6 children. There are 4 main reasons then for demographic winter in order of importance. First, low rates of religious practice, which are associated with low birth rates and high incidence of abortion. Second, social benefits so high as to displace gifts within the family, particularly the gift of life. Third, legacies of totalitarianism. And finally, heavy reliance on fiscal policies which penalize investment in people, or so-called human capital. What does this mean for policy? Based on current projections, the federal budget would substantially increase social benefits as a share of national income, because of the strong inverse relationship between the birth rate and per capita social benefits, I project that the U.S. birth rate will fall significantly under current law from about 1.83 to about 1.64 children per couple. These projections indicate that the U.S. federal budget is likely to shift society towards conditions approximating the Social Security trustees' high cost assumptions. Years ago, the three most populous countries in the world were China, India, and the United States. That's still true today. But the practice of abortion in China, but not as widely in India, is causing a reversal of the first and second places. So in 50 years, it's estimated that India will be first and China second. Adjusted for differences in mortality rates, in 2005 to 10, China's total fertility rate was 1.53 after, but 2.1, or the replacement rate before abortions. India's 2.3 after and 2.4 before abortions. The USA, 2.01 after, but 2.66 before abortions. And fourth largest, Indonesia's 2.04 after, but 3.05 before abortions. Based on all 53 countries for which data are available, comprising about 2/3 of world population, the world total fertility rate in 2005 to 10 was about 1.89 after abortions, but 2.38 before abortions. Of course, the birth rate does not reflect illegitimacy, which has risen from less than 4% in 1940, as Eric mentioned, to more than 40% of all births. As Janet Yellen, yes, that Janet Yellen, and her husband George Akerlof were surprised to discover, legalizing abortion contributed to a retreat from marriage. As they concluded, although many observers expected liberalized abortion and contraception to lead to fewer out-of-wedlock births, in fact, the opposite happened, particularly because of the erosion of the custom of shotgun marriages. The rule of legal abortion, although contraception and the legalization of abortion happened at about the same time, if you compare this and do statistical analysis, what you find is that the impact on the divorce rate is obvious from the contemporaneous increases in legal abortions, here shown among abortions among married women, and the divorce rate. Many fear that marriage in America is going irretrievably to hell in a handbasket. I would caution against the Wizziati fallacy that what you see is all there is, Wizziati. Data back to colonial times show that American marriage went to hell in a handbasket several times before. For example, extramarital conceptions were about 1/4 in 1900, the same as they had risen to in 1986, and they were about 1/3 of all births in 1776. So I don't claim that another great awakening, like the one I was blessed to be born in, is inevitable, but I do claim that the handbasket is not. I'd like to close by endorsing two correct innovations by Pope Francis. First, his rejection of what he calls gender ideology, which mistakes gender equality for gender identity. And second, his rejection of the prevailing theory of sustainability, or its basic premise, that, in the words of one of its foremost theorists, population control is the sine qua non of sustainable development. He points out that, in his words, concern for the protection of nature is incompatible with the justification of abortion. In short, demographic winter itself is unsustainable for human ecology. Economics has been called the dismal science, but I like to emphasize that my message is one of hope. All of the unfavorable trends that I have discussed here are reversible if we reverse the policies which cause them. Thank you very much.
Smoot is president of the Family First Foundation, the Excel Investment Corporation, co-owner and broker of Sky Properties, a real estate investment company. So you're pretty busy. He's co-producer of 4 documentaries, a couple of which I've seen and are excellent, I gotta say. Demographic Winter, The Decline of the Human Family, Demographic Bomb, Demography is Destiny, The New Economic Reality, and Lost Civilizations of North America. Stephen's also the author of The Lost Antiquities, A Hidden History. He's been an invited speaker at the European Parliament Family Conference, in addition to speaking at World Congress of Families and Freedom conferences worldwide. He's married to Kathleen Reed, and they have 9 children and 14 grandchildren. Nice. He's going to discuss findings from his very well-received documentaries, Demographic Winter and Demographic Bomb.
May I start by asking a question? How do we value children in today's world? Do we value children as a burden or as a blessing on society? Or have we been so indoctrinated with this idea that the world is overcrowded, that we can't sustain ourselves going forward, and that we should have less carbon footprints to pollute Mother Earth, that we're now willing to sacrifice children, which has been the lifeblood and the human capital that's needed for our country's continued growth and economic prosperity? In our interviews and research and production of 3 documentaries, as mentioned, Demographic Winter, Decline of the Human Family, Demographic Bomb, and the New Economic Reality, Demographic Winter, our production team interviewed many scholars, demographers, economists, and sociologists, and even civic leaders from around the world who shared evidence of major demographic changes that have been taking place worldwide. We call this new season of change a demographic winter. I was in New York attending the 2011 United Nations Commission on Social Development, and to give an introduction screening at the UN Millennial Plaza of our latest documentary, The New Economic Reality. It was a beautiful morning in March as I was walking to the UN Plaza, as the sun rays was just starting to peek around these giant buildings of Manhattan, as I caught a glimpse of ships coming into the New York harbor, wondering if my European ancestors may have come through those same portals in a time in history when we understood as Americans that immigrants was necessary for our continued growth and economic prosperity. In the film introduction, I shared the words of Phil Longman, a Washington, D.C. demographer and author of the book The Empty Cradle, who stated that demographics may be the greatest predictor of the fate and future of society in the 21st century. What is demographics? It is a study of the statistical data that makes up a population. Its growth, its decline, its birth rates, the age and gender makeup of a population, etc. So does demographics of a country really matter? And is population important to a society? At the time of the fall of the Greek Empire, Polybus in 150 BC stated, nowadays, all over Greece, in a general manner, such depopulation that towns are deserted and fields lie fallow. Although this country has not been ravaged by wars or epidemics, the cause of this harm is evident. The people, if they marry, will not bring up children as they ought. It is in this way that the scourge before us has rapidly developed. Shortly thereafter, Greece was annexed as a Roman state in 146 BC. A period of great decline followed, with a loss of some 40% of its population, in which it dropped from 47 million down to 29 million. We refer to this period of decline as the Dark Ages. The world today has experienced a 50% decline in birth rates over the last 50 years, leaving some 53 countries around the world that will not even replace the previous generation. If a country is to replace its previous generation, it takes a birth rate of 2.1 children to replace every 2 individuals. And all of Europe, for example, is only at 1.38. If a country's birth rate declines below 1.1, it puts the country in serious jeopardy of free fall, which is almost impossible to get turned around. The United Nations Population Division estimates that by the year 2050 that there will be 248 million fewer children under the age of 5 than there are at present. Dr. Nicholas Eberstadt, a Harvard demographer at the American Enterprise Institute, shared this insight, stating, "There are a lot of countries around the world where death exceed live births. In Russia, for example, there is over 140 deaths for every 100 births." While visiting Russia, a Russian demographer stated that he wanted to take us on a road trip across Russia to show us all the abandoned villages and towns that he was seeing there. Now, Russia today is losing over 1 million of its population each year, as they were slow to really wake up to the fact that their abortions had increased to 4.1 million per year, and their live births were only at 1.9 million. While filming in 2008 in Germany, a German demographer told us that that very year they had closed 230 schools because there were not enough children to go around. Isn't this decline of population a good thing? I mean, that's kind of what we've been indoctrinated, and that's been passed on. Let me maybe perhaps give you a perspective. And this is a hypothetical example here. But let's take this hypothetical example, and let's assume that we could take the entire population of the world, which is approaching 7 billion, and give every man, woman, and child a quarter of an acre of ground. That leaves a family of 4 an acre of ground to cultivate and farm to help to sustain, their family. You could place the entire population of the world in just one of the 11 major countries of South America, Brazil, leaving 1/6 of Brazil in open space. That would leave all the rest of South America totally uninhabited. That's Central America, North America uninhabited. That's taking all of China, India, Africa, and all of Europe, and every other continent and island of the sea, and leaving it totally uninhabited. So we're kind of, indoctrinated with this idea that we can't sustain ourselves. But history has shown that as population increases, so does the stock of human ingenuity. As population grows, it creates pressure on the resources, and people become more innovative. As the Bible says, there really is ample and enough. In our interview with Gary Becker, a recipient of the Nobel Prize in Economics, he stated that population reduction enters us into unknown terrain. Adam Smith, the greatest economist, said that economic prosperity comes from population growth, and depression is associated with declining populations. This could lead to very serious consequences. What economic consequences are really happening due to all the population control programs and policies that have been implemented worldwide? One policy that was implemented was the one-child policy in China, which shows what demographers refer to as a 4-2-1 scenario, which leaves one child to take care of 2 parents who are going into retirement and 4 grandparents who are in retirement, leaving one child to create enough economic stimulus and provide the benefits. Basically, one child to pull the wagon while 6 are looking to ride as they're entered into their retirement years. This is an economic model that has been turned totally upside down. And China is really feeling the effects of it, as this is definitely a demographic time bomb for them, as their economy has experienced a huge slowdown. Since July 12th of 2015, their stock market plummeted by over 38%, losing over $3.25 trillion of value. A good example from history of what happens when a country stops having children is Japan. After World War II, Japan had all their women in the workforce for the war machine. After World War II, they kept them all in the workforce to clean up the ashes of destruction. And so Japan didn't really have a baby boom generation like America. We came home, our soldiers, and it gave us 81 million baby boom generation, which was giving us about 40 years of great prosperity. And that prosperity has kind of flowed over to other countries around the world. But since they had all the women in the workforce, during the 70s and 80s, they really did quite well, causing many economists and politicians to claim that the United States should really follow this model by encouraging all the women to enter into the workforce, but forgetting a very important factor, that you need to have children to have economic prosperity. You need to have growth. Thus, Japan was one of the first countries to experience this major birth dearth, as we're seeing around the world, as the country of the rising sun is really now setting. Today, Japan's low birth rate and rapidly aging population has led to a huge national debt, which is 230 times their gross domestic product, or the GDP. As compared with Greece, for example, whose national debt is 177% of their GDP. And we all really know what happened to Greece as they went bankrupt. Today we find a definite correlation showing that countries with low birth rates and rapidly aging populations are the same countries which are now being burdened down by this mounting national debt. So how does the United States stack up and compare? Today, the United States national debt has now surpassed its annual GDP, which makes it very comparable to such countries as France, Spain, Belgium, and Cyprus, which is really not good news for the future of America. What does this correlation tell us? That if our aging population continues to grow, and it will, and our birth rates continue to decline, that America is headed down the path that will lead to its ultimate downfall. This correlation needs to be understood by leaders and policymakers worldwide. Another changing demographic that will have costly consequences for society is that young adults from around the world in their prime childbearing years are less likely to get married and to have children. Along with lower birth rates, there is an increased number of babies being born to unwed mothers. Research shows statistically that children born outside wedlock, without a mother and father in the home, are more likely to try drugs, to be sexually active, to drop out of school, to need public daycare services, to live in poverty, to have mental health issues, or to be incarcerated. This mounting costs really will have a huge effect on the public coffers, of America. In 2008, a report entitled "The Taxpayers' Costs of Divorce and Unwed Childbearing," it states that by strengthening the natural family structure, it will reduce the need for costly social and economic programs. Showing that family fragmentation will cost the U.S. taxpayers over $1 trillion over a 10-year period for just child care and welfare services alone. To avoid this chilling effect of this coming demographic winter, policymakers must come to understand the important role that children, marriage, and family play in their country's continued growth and economic prosperity. Then and only then will society elevate the value that they have placed on children, motherhood, marriage, religion, and family. It is my hope, you know, that we can work together to secure a future for the family worldwide. And the real economic solution, as we should know, is to strengthen the family. Thank you.
As discussed earlier, the topic of this panel is the economic and social costs of family breakdown. So we've heard some pretty alarming things, also some hopeful notes. Chris Carmouche is gonna summarize what we've been talking about with his last presentation here. Chris holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Washington Lee University and a Master's from Virginia Commonwealth. He served in the United States Army from 1991 through 1995. He co-founded a chapter of the Christian Coalition in Monterey, California, and eventually went to work for the National Office of the Christian Coalition of America. Chris has also served on the board of Young Americans for Freedom and as its executive director. In 2004, Chris co-founded GrasstopsUSA, an internet-based conservative activist organization, and later formed a consulting firm, C4 Strategies, with a focus on fundraising and activism for conservative organizations. Christopher Carmouche.
Now, Senator Marco Rubio couldn't be here, so I decided to bring his water for him. The economic and social costs of family breakdown. Now, I believe this topic begs the question, are there social and economic effects that follow policies that promote the breakdown of a family? It's important to say that because for so many years, we've been told that there are none. And we have allowed those who oppose the natural family to get away with framing a number of false narratives over the years. We've been told, why should we oppose the right of a woman to terminate her pregnancy? It is, after all, none of our business and does nothing to harm us or the society as a whole. We've been told that we should not oppose people choosing to procreate outside of the bonds of matrimony, because after all, what other people choose to do is none of our business and does nothing to harm us or the society as a whole. We've been told that we promote a much healthier society if we encourage young people to achieve their dreams, to put off marriage until late in life, and thereby have fewer children. And yes, we are now being told that if two men, or two women for that matter, wish to call their union a marriage, then it's the obligation of the state to affirm that, and that anything as simple as someone exercising their First Amendment right to say that two people of the same sex marrying is a contradiction in terms is nothing more than an attempt by that person to force their values, and particularly their religious values, on others, and that people should not stick their noses in what is other people's business, particularly when it does no harm to us or our society as a whole. But of course, these policies and trends do harm society as a whole. And it's time for people of good conscience to set aside the false narratives, stand for the truth in spite of the consequences, and instead concentrate on the real questions. Now, I'm proud of the fact that I live in the United States and that individual liberties are enshrined in our laws and founding documents. I'm proud that I live in a country that allows an individual a great deal of latitude when it comes to the actions that they take and the choices that they make when it comes to how they wish to live their lives. But we can never allow ourselves to be deceived into believing that societies have no values, because all societies do in fact have values. What we call positive tolerance is in fact a value. And the task before each of us is to determine which values promote a healthy society and which values promote a society that is harmful, and to set the former as the standard and as the norm. We've been down this road for thousands of years. Our forebears understood the dangers of the road we're traveling all too well. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them. And God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. I quoted Genesis for a reason. For those of us who actually believe in the Old Testament or the Torah, be fruitful and multiply was the very first commandment that God ever gave man.
Amen.
For the rest of us, it simply shows that men have known for at least 4,000 years what the primary role of individuals in a society should be. But an understanding of these dangers is not confined to Scripture. The Emperor Caesar Augustus, 2,000 years ago, actually instituted laws to encourage marriage and childbirth. Reputedly, he made the following statement in admonishment of the young nobles of Rome, whose licentious behavior he found to be reprehensible and a clear and present danger to the survival of Rome itself. Quote, what shall I call you? Men? But you aren't fulfilling the duties of men. Citizens? But for all your efforts, the city is perishing. Romans? But you are in the process of blotting out this name altogether. What humanity would be left if all the rest of mankind should do what you are doing? You are committing murder and not bothering in the first place those who ought to be your descendants. And yes, we have a modern day example of what happens to a society when policies that promote family breakdown are affirmed. If you want to see what happens to people when the government and society at large promote policies that actually lead to a breakdown of the family, look no further than the black community. Walk up to any woman in a low-income neighborhood and ask about abortion, freely available contraception at no cost, welfare, the promotion of sexual promiscuity in the schools, the lack of a father in the household. To paraphrase what Dr. Phil might say, we could ask, so how's that working out for you? Now, we could devote an entire conference to the social and economic effects of family breakdown in the black community. Time does not even permit us to begin talking in depth about something that we probably already all agree is a massive problem plaguing our society. But Roger Clegg, writing for the Heritage Foundation, summed it up quite well. Quote, the federal government has posted its annual compilation of birth data, including out-of-wedlock births. Here's the bad news. Preliminary data indicates that 40.7% of all 2012 births were out of wedlock among non-Hispanic blacks. That figure is highest at 72.2%. Clay goes on to state, it is of course no surprise that the groups with the highest illegitimacy rates are the groups that are struggling economically, educationally, with crime, and so forth. Now, when it comes to what I personally believe, I'm a bit of an enigma, even to those who know me. On a number of occasions, good friends have actually approached me, who've known me for years, and asked, do you consider yourself a social conservative or an economic conservative? The question has always confused me, because I believe that it's a contradiction to separate the two. To be one without being the other is not to be a conservative at all. Because everything that is socially undesirable has a detrimental effect on the economy. And that, conversely, which has a detrimental effect on the economy, has a detrimental effect on society as well. The two cannot be separated. One, since 1973, we've aborted over 50 million children. And now we're faced with rising Medicare costs and a social security system that is quite literally bankrupt. Politicians on both sides of the aisle like to offer solutions. But all of these solutions ignore the root of the problem. Far too few people of working age are supporting a society that is becoming increasingly older. We are the problem. We are not having children in intact families, and moreover, we're allowing our political leaders to promote policies and programs that actually diminish the family. Two is for those children who are lucky enough to make it out of the womb and were born into single-family households, the cost is staggering, according to Heritage again. The cost of divorce and family breakdown, both to taxpayers and to long-term economic growth, is immense. Estimates of the annual cost of divorce and unmarried children range as high as $112 billion annually. But the actual cost is even higher. Even Heritage acknowledges that the costs are probably much higher. Conversely, couples who avoid divorce typically save the taxpayer in reduced utilization of family courts, the criminal justice system, and social services, unquote. And moreover, study after study shows us that there is a correlation between crime and poverty and lack of education and being raised in a single-parent household. In summation, what we do as a society has consequences. And the problem is not that we have simply forgotten what was self-apparent throughout 6,000 years of recorded history, but rather that we are rushing headlong into a direct contradiction of what was self-apparent for so long. And the consequences, if we do not address them, could be disastrous. Through our own idiocy, through the promotion of insidious ideas and pernicious policies, we are actually inflicting a sort of genocide upon ourselves. Now, I'll conclude with a challenge. Stopping the genocide stops with each and every one of us summoning the courage to speak out for what is right and what is healthy for our society. It's not about us, it's not about them, it's about all of us. And it's not easy. To speak the truth will be considered out of fashion these days. It will expose you to name-calling and ridicule. Even now, Christians in this country are being financially ruined and even thrown into jail for choosing to freely exercise their religious beliefs. I speak of people like Baronet Stutzman in Washington, the owners of Elaine Photography in New Mexico, Kim Davis in Kentucky. George Orwell once stated, quote, "In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." And that is why the solution starts with each and every one of us being willing to commit that revolutionary act. We must set aside our fears. We must speak out for what is right. Because to be silent is to be complicit.